These images are from students protesting the use of algorithmic grading in the UK last year. An algorithm was used to determine students' final grades in lieu of examinations because of the restrictions related to COVID. Many students received much lower grades than they had expected, which resulted in the loss of university places and jobs, with students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds being disproportionately affected. Algorithmic decision-making is also being used in other high-stakes decisions, for example, in hiring decisions, medical triage and assessment, and performance evaluation. Given the gravity of these decisions, the ability to contest algorithmic outcomes has been raised in multiple guidelines and principles relating to the development and deployment of algorithmic decision-making systems. For example, the Ethics Guidelines for Trustworthy AI, developed by the EU's high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, states the procedural dimension of fairness entails the ability to contest and seek effective redress against decisions made by AI systems and by the humans operating them. The OECD, in its principles on artificial intelligence, includes there should be transparency and responsible disclosure around AI systems to ensure that people understand AI-based outcomes and can challenge them. In addition to these voluntary guidelines, Article 22, Paragraph 3 of the GDPR provides a legal right to contest decisions that have been made using solely automated processes. These guidelines and legislation do not offer specifics about how contestation processes could or should work. The aim of our study was to explore how contestability in algorithmic decision-making is conceptualized, and to explore how the contestation process could operate. In the academic literature, there are currently a range of conceptualizations and interpretations of what contestability in algorithmic decision-making requires. For example, some suggest that contestable algorithmic decision-making systems are those that allow a decision subject to interact directly with the system during the decision-making process. Whereas under the GDPR, contesting is seen as a post-decision process, requiring a human reviewer. Armada suggests that algorithmic decision-making systems should be designed in ways that reduce the need for contestation, for example, through using participatory design principles, and he calls this contestability by design. There's also the notion of recourse, which focuses on the ability of a person to change the decision of the model through actionable input variables. We chose to analyse written submissions that were made in response to a discussion paper titled Artificial Intelligence, Australia's Ethics Framework, which was released by the Australian Government in April 2019. This was the first framework of its kind to specifically include contestability as a principle for designing, developing, and deploying ethical AI. The description for contestability was when an algorithm impacts a person, there must be an efficient process to allow that person to challenge the use or output of the algorithm. Over 130 submissions were made by a broad range of stakeholders, including individual members of the public, corporations and businesses, including multinational companies such as Microsoft and Adobe, as well as small to medium enterprises. Submissions were also received from academics, universities, research institutes, community organisations, and industry associations. 65 submissions made comments about contestability, and these submissions formed our dataset, which we analysed using Braun and Clark's six-stage approach to thematic analysis. Our analysis provided three key themes in relation to the conceptualisation of contestability. So first off, the nature of contestability is disputed. There was no consensus in the submissions as to what contestability actually is. Some submissions view it as an ethical principle in its own right, an end in itself, and thought that it sat well as an individual principle, like fairness, accountability, and transparency. But others saw it as more of a means to an end, with some seeing it as a dimension of a higher order ethical principle, such as fairness. And others saw contestability as a practical mechanism that could be used to implement other principles. The second theme is contestability as a way to protect individuals. Many of the submissions noted the power differential between decision subject and decision maker, and how this is exacerbated by the use of opaque algorithmic systems. The ability to contest a decision was seen as offering decision subjects protection, allowing them to take back a little control and to hold the decision makers to account. Many submissions highlighted the need for contestability to be an enforceable right, as well as for the need for redress. Submissions also emphasise the need for additional mechanisms to regulate the use of AI in decision-making, so that regulation is not just provided through individuals contesting decisions. The final theme is contestability in algorithmic decision-making resembles contestability in relation to human decision-making. In suggesting ways for algorithmic decisions to be reviewed, submissions drew strongly from contestation processes currently used in relation to human decision-making, such as internal review processes within the decision-making entity, and external review processes, such as ombudsman, administrative review bodies, and court. Few submissions contemplated the need for different types of review processes, and there may be a number of different explanations for this. For example, people's thinking might be anchored by what they already know, preferring processes that they've already been exposed to. The submissions also emphasised the need for human review. Very few submissions highlighted that human decision-making can also be flawed or biased. The second part of our analysis focused on understanding how contestability in algorithmic decision-making should be operationalised. We found three distinct requirements. First, there are policy decisions that need to be determined to provide the scope of contestation. For example, what can be contested? Second, contesting requires a process, and the submissions highlighted four basic steps. The initial decision must be made and communicated to the decision subject. The decision subject must decide whether to contest. There needs to be a clear pathway to initiate contestation, and a review of the contested decision needs to be undertaken. Finally, the submissions also emphasised that the contestation process must be designed to be accessible, in line with relevant legislation, and context-aware. Some takeaways from this work include that many submissions highlight opacity as a key challenge in designing for contestability. Many algorithmic decision-making systems now rely on advanced computational techniques. The decision rules and inputs of these black box systems are often obscured due to their technical complexity, or are only interpretable by experts, if at all. Additionally, the workings of these systems may be intentionally hidden to protect proprietary interests. Opacity in its various forms results in limited information being provided to decision subjects, which makes it difficult to understand why a decision has been made, and consequently, to contest it in any meaningful way. A second key takeaway is that people tend to envision contestation processes that already exist for human decision-making. Few submissions consider whether existing contestation methods, including human review, will be fit for purpose in relation to decisions made using algorithmic systems. Existing contestation processes have been designed to review human decision-making and to address human errors and biases. More thought needs to be given to whether these existing contestation processes provide the best review mechanisms, given the unique challenges algorithmic decision-making faces, such as opacity. At a practical level, it's also important to consider whether and how human review of algorithmic decisions would work. For example, would a completely new decision be made, or would the human be reviewing the functioning of the system? Further, scalability needs to be considered. The majority of submissions viewed the ability to contest as a post hoc mechanism, such as an appeal process, rather than a mechanism that can be designed into an AI system. However, it's important to consider the design of the system and how contestability can be supported from conception, as suggested by Armada, rather than being implemented as a completely separate post hoc process. Thank you for watching this presentation. For more information, please see our paper, Conceptualising Contestability, Perspectives on Contesting Algorithmic Decisions.